All right, so let's just start with your background in sport. Your background in extreme sport and also in basketball, and then how that translated into working with adaptive athletes.
It's a bit of a journey. I'm gonna be honest with you. It starts back in the southeast coast of Florida, and when you're in those spaces, you're exposed to sports like surfing and skating and BMX racing and all the different dopamine, squirts you can try to get in your brain. Basketball was the traditional sport that I played, and that was all the way through junior year of high school. Decided to focus on academics in undergrad, wanted to study what was going on above the shoulders. So psychology was my main interest. And then from there, I realized, grad school was probably something in my future. And so I attended Auburn University and studied below the neck for my master's program, which was exercise science. Quickly realized that those two entities don't really occur in isolation, meaning brain versus body. And so went into my PhD program, studied psychophysiology, which is just really a fancy word for mind body, body mind connection. And all the while throughout grad school, I worked with Auburn Adapted Athletics. And specifically from 2012 to 2016, I was the strength coach for wheelchair basketball. In addition to that, and the kind of parallel is I was training for Team USA in the sport of team handball. And for your listeners and your viewers, it's not the ball against the wall. It's like soccer with your hand or water polo on land. And really, Julia, I thought that those two worlds, wheelchair basketball was on one side of the coin and team handball was on this other side of the coin. Never thought of it smashing together until last year, November of 2023. And that's a whole nother conversation. Obviously, I'm sure it'll come up, but that's the background within sports and how it led me to academics and then back full circle with Team USA Handball.
So, prior to your coaching experience with the adaptive athletes, how were you introduced to handball as an athlete?
Okay, so in 2013, so I got to Auburn University in 2012, and I was a master's student, 1 year program. In 2013, the national governing body, so the Federation for Team Handball, USA Team Handball, came to Auburn University on a site visit to determine their next location for their residency program for their senior men and women's teams. It just so happened that my advisor had to go on a trip that weekend. He said, "Hey, we're going to put you in the mix. You got to present to the NGB." Now, granted, this is only my first year at Auburn. I could barely tie my shoes, let alone speak to an entire NGB on how our lab can help facilitate the process. But prepared myself, went in there, delivered the presentation at the very end. Head coach Javier Garcia Cuesta at the time was the head coach for the men's senior team. He came up to me at the end and he said, "Are you coming to tryouts tomorrow?" This was a Friday afternoon. And while I knew about tryouts, I was really focused on academics at that point within the master's program and wanting to go into the PhD program. And so I said, "Oh, yes, sir. I'm going to come to tryout, but I don't know how to play this sport. Like, I have no idea what it is. I've watched a few YouTube videos. I like to think myself as athletic. I can run, jump, catch, throw, cut, move." And he's just kind of looking at me with like cross eyes, basically, like waiting for me to stop talking. And he said in his Spanish accent, he's from Spain originally, he said, "It's okay. I'll teach you." And he just like taps me on the shoulder. I'm like, whoa, that was kind of one of those moments that you look back on, and you realize you can either go in one direction or the other. And ultimately, I didn't want to disrespect the head coach of the senior team. I went to that tryout, and the rest is history. I played for 7 years from 13 to 20, retired after the pandemic hit and the world shut down and things were postponed. So glad I did. And that opened the door for more opportunities from a support staff standpoint here at Auburn and working in national governing bodies. And then, yeah, fast forward, and now I'm at the helm with this new team.
Can you talk about the difference between how handball is played versus beach handball, and also the difference in as a player, what that looks like?
Yeah, so the full circle to that is obviously Jupiter, Florida, growing up on the beach. I started with the indoor version of the sport. So team handball is the sport, and then there's two disciplines. Indoor, which is played 6v6, so 6 people on offense, 6 people on defense, including a goalie. So you just picture literally a smaller soccer field, but we play on a basketball floor indoors. And there's, instead of large soccer nets, there's smaller handball nets, and you're just throwing the ball into the net as opposed to kicking it into the net. So the differences in between indoor and beach, obviously the playing surface and the environment itself, but also the number of opponents on the floor at any given time. So beach is played in more of a 4-on-4 situation, and it's kind of like a hockey lineup, hockey exchange. So when you're on defense, you only have three players on the court, but your goalie is your fourth defender. And then as you transition into offense, you can either switch out or you can play player advantage. So that's the delineation between indoor 6v6 and beach 4v4. Able body, by the way, that's all able body sport.
Right. What was it about Auburn that the governing body saw promise in?
It was a lot of different things. Number one, my lead mentor at the time and now assistant coach on the wheelchair handball team, she's a 1984 Olympian in the sport of team handball, and she was coached by Javier Garcia Cuesta. And so he called her and said, "Hey, Rita," her name is Rita Clanton, said, we're interested in finding a location. We're talking to a place in New York and Boston, Chicago, LA, Miami. And she said she got off the phone that day and she's like, well, why not Auburn? Auburn University would be a perfect place to host a residency program. We have a massive coliseum here, which affords the opportunity for the space of the floor. It's a little larger than a basketball court, so you need that extra space on either side. And then she started thinking about potential research opportunities with the School of Kinesiology, which is the unit that I was a part of as a student and now a professor. She also thought about job opportunities in the Auburn Opelika area. There's plenty of housing, and there's options when it comes to meals, and so it all just started to spin in her mind. So she called Coach Cuesta back and said, "Hey, we would like to, have the NGB consider Auburn University as a potential option." He said, "Okay, I'll talk to the NGB about it." And then at the time, Rita Clanton was talking to Dr. Mary Rudisil, who is currently and was the head of the School of Kinesiology, the department chair. And she said, "I think this is a great opportunity for not only the Federation, but for Auburn University as a whole, and specifically the School of Kinesiology. We have about 20 professors, and each lab is different. And we thought that each lab could provide that team with obviously research, but a way to optimize performance on all facets." So it was kind of a no brainer. And when they came on site, we thought we were going to have to pitch the Federation, but really the Federation was pitching us, and it was interesting to see the coalescence, if you will. It was a conversation happening at once, which is really nice. And a lot of this is I've learned in hindsight. At the time, I was a grad student, not really knowing the full picture. But as you traverse those now 10 years since it started, you learn a lot about the story, and you learn about how much was involved and how much synergy that it took for everything to fall into place. And I'm just a small piece of the big story, and it's an honor to be a part of it all and to watch it transition over the past decade is really cool.
How does your work with mindfulness at Auburn work into why you were selected to kind of head start this kind of like team building initiative?
Yeah, so in 2012 is when I met my initial supervisor, and by 2013 I met Rita Clinton, and she was teaching a class on Auburn University's campus, and it was a stress reduction course. And then at the same time, Dr. Mary Rudisil said, "I think you guys should work together." So we started working together. It was super organic. I had no plans on doing any of this. I just was saying yes to the opportunities. And so by fall of 2013, which is kind of weird to say, we're starting fall of 2024 on Monday. So that's kind of to earmark the episode. We started working together. We started teaching a course for undergraduates, and there was 20 students. And I was following her lead, learning about constructs and nomenclature and vernacular associated with what my lifestyle was growing up. To full circle back to Jupiter, Florida again. When you're in environments like that, when the water's so blue like Hawaii or the Bahamas, and your shoes are off and your shirt's off, you're in the sand, there's palm trees flowing, you kind of have to be present. How could you not? How could your mind be wandering when you're in such a serene place like that? So I think I was mindful to a certain degree, but I didn't know there was any science behind it, or there were words to describe or train that type of construct. I was just a kid living my life. So I come to Auburn, I meet Rita, I start quote teaching, and I was learning as I was quote teaching in those early days. And I thought, this is stuff I've been doing for a long time. And then I just sharpened my skill. And by 2017, when I started my professorship, I was tasked with heading up the Mindfulness at Auburn initiative and what that initiative is all about. And from 2013 to 2017, by the way, a lot of stuff happened to get to that point. But in 2017, we kickstarted Mindfulness at Auburn. And that's a platform on campus that we utilize to leverage evidence based constructs in order to optimize human performance without sacrificing health and well being. I think that often gets separated out. The mentality is if I want to perform at a high level, I have to just ignore all this other stuff. And we take the opposite approach. We say that in order to perform at your highest level, you really have to take care of the vessel. You're only given one and it's borrowed, including your time. And so being intentional about how you practice these really simple techniques, but can be very powerful, have high return on investment. So we were doing speaking engagements on campus, locally, regionally. We started working nationally, doing some keynotes internationally, and then bam, the world shuts down March of 2020. So we pivoted and we started doing virtual seminars and consultations and getting invited by certain teams. And that just really blossomed into a specific methodology that I began to utilize with Auburn wheelchair basketball specifically. So I mentioned in 2016, and I know I'm throwing a lot of dates around, so hopefully people are tracking us. We should make like a chronological order for everyone
You
in the
you need a
episode notes.
timeline for your
Yeah,
episode.
we'll throw a timeline in here for everyone. In 2016, when I stopped as a strength coach, the reason for that was it was my dissertation year. So 16 to 17, I was working on dissertation. At the same time, I met head coach Rob Taylor, who in our pre-call I mentioned he's heading to Paris in just a few days' time. He's the senior coach, senior men's coach for Team USA Wheelchair Basketball. He came to Auburn University to push that program to the next level. So from 2016 into 2017, we started our conversation. And from 2017 on, I've worked as a volunteer seasonal performance coach for that team. So I know it's a long answer to your question, but it's the backstory behind how mindfulness is incorporated not only in my teaching and my speaking, as well as my coaching. And as a performance coach, it's the foundation. So when this opportunity came to fruition, my phone rang. It was a former teammate of mine, ABA Udo Odoma, and he said, "Hey, you're the only person that I can think of in our country that has wheelchair specific experience and team handball experience, professorship, directorship, performance coach. This is a no brainer for us. Are you interested?" And by the way, I was getting on a flight to Hawaii for Thanksgiving break and it was my birthday. And I'm like, yeah, this sounds cool, man. But like, honestly, I'm going on vacation right now and I'm not really going to think too much about this stuff. So it wasn't until December of last year, 2023, I went over to Rita's house and I was mentioning it to her. And she said, "Hey, you should be the coach." And I was like, I don't really know right now. It's still kind of up in the air. By January of 24, just this year, we started having conversations. And April 1st, it's not an April Fool's joke. April 1st, I submitted a formal proposal to the International Handball Federation, the IHF, denoting how and where and what and why we wanted to be a part of this upcoming competition in September of this year. And I sent it off in 45 days, Julia. 45 days radio silence. May 16th, my phone rings. It's ABA. It leaves me a voicemail. I still have the voicemail on my phone, by the way. "Hey, man, I don't know if you saw or you read or you heard, but we've been unanimously awarded the wild card for the upcoming world championships. And we want to know if you're still interested in building the team." And I was like, whoa. I mean, that was kind of heavy, because up until that point, you're thinking maybe, maybe not, who knows, let the universe decide. And then boom, the phone rings. And since then, we've been off to the races. And now, in less than 30 days, we'll be landing in Cairo, Egypt, playing in the world championships in a sport that 4 months ago, no one in this country had even a clue it existed, with that being wheelchair handball.
What do you think is the impact of having able-bodied athletes advocate for a space in their sport for people with disabilities to also participate?
Yeah, adaptive athletes are pretty incredible to say the absolute least. I mean, it's amazing being around any athlete but I think the volume gets turned up when you're around adapted athletes because when you sit back and realize that I no longer see the chair when I work with wheelchair basketball, I don't see the chair. When I'm with wheelchair handball, I still don't see the chair. And what I mean by that is it's been normalized for me. When I go watch able bodied basketball, it's slow. It's boring. I don't understand why there's no contact and where's the noise of the metal banging against each other and where's the hollering. It's kind of, it seems just a little bit less serious, I guess, is the way I would describe it, versus when you watch wheelchair sport. I mean, it's a level of intensity that you can't really explain until you experience it. And I always have my students, I give them the opportunity to come to a wheelchair basketball game on site at Auburn University for extra credit. And they always think when they hear the word wheelchair as an able bodied individual, the preconceived notion is that, okay, it's going to be slower, it's not going to be as intense. You know, it's that notion of wheelchair bound, that very archaic perspective of an adapted athlete or a disabled person. And that's not the case. They come and they see these elite athletes going way faster than any able bodied athlete, doing maneuvers that they didn't even think were possible, hitting the floor, rolling out of their chair, popping back up, and getting back on defense. And it totally reshapes the student's brain. And it's not just students. I mean, people in the community come and they say the same thing. So it's an interesting position to be in. I'm a former able-bodied athlete. I'm a current able-bodied coach in a adaptive sport. But I always tell my athletes and tell my staff, this is an athlete-centered team. I don't play this sport. So we lean into our athletes and we ask questions about, hey, this is what we're looking for from a tactical or technical standpoint. How can you translate it into adaptive sport? Because again, we're not in the chair. And so now it's a conversation versus just an authoritative figure talking this way into an athlete's space. And I think that does a lot of different things. And I'm sure we can unpack that if you're interested in doing so. But the perspective is always athlete centered, athlete focused. It's your team. We're here to guide you. But really, you're sharing with us what makes most sense in order for all of us to be successful and to reach our optimal performance.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like when I talk to athletes and coaches who were athletes, it's always within the realm of the same sport. And then there are some outliers who have changed sports, who have gone professional in a sport that they didn't play in college, but I don't really see a lot of athletes who then go on to an adaptive version of a sport that they played as an able-bodied athlete. So I
Mm.
just think that your story is very unique, at least to what I've seen. Is it unique to what you've seen? I mean, you're obviously in the space.
If I ran the numbers on it, and I mean, you could quote me on this, and people may say I'm wrong. It's just a general thought. Being around wheelchair basketball at the collegiate level, and you know, that's a small sample size in the United States. If I had to guess, the majority, and I'll use that term loosely, of coaches, head coaches specifically, are former adapted athletes that played that specific sport. Coach Rob Taylor is an able bodied head coach, and he's one of the most successful coaches on the world stage, which is really amazing. But he's been around the sport for over 20 years. And so there's something to be said about the experience, of course. I've been with adaptive sports since 2012, 12 years. I played team handball 7 years on the international stage, but it's as recent as May 16th, if you want to call it that, I've been appointed the head coach. So the role is really new for me, but the experience is not. And I think that's what makes it really unique. I mean, if you told me in 2012 when I came here as a undergrad, excuse me, as a grad student that I would be in the position I am in 12 years later, I'd probably say, yeah, I don't think so. You know, I'm going to go and work in industry at Nike or Adidas or Under Armour or Puma or something like that in a performance sector. I never would have guessed that this would be my life in 2024. But Julia, it feels so right. I mean, it's a lot of work, as you can imagine, but it's also a lot of fun. And to have the opportunity to push the narrative for adaptive athletes and elevate wheelchair handball to the next level domestically and internationally, I mean, it's a once in a lifetime situation. So I'm trying to soak in every moment as much as possible.
When you were working with adaptive athletes at Auburn as the performance coach, what did you see the difference being primarily between your work with able-bodied athletes and those in wheelchairs? I
At the
mean,
end of the day, I don't,
was there a difference?
yeah, I don't think there really is a difference. I think that in general, able bodied athletes are soft in comparison to adapted athletes. And I'm saying that because when I was an able bodied athlete, I'd come in, I'd be like, my back is tight, or I rolled my ankle at practice last night. Woe is me. And then you go and work with adapted athletes and you see what they're up against, and you have an able bodied basketball player, for example, that goes through conditioning, and then the rest of the day they're able to relax. They can sit in class or go and lay and take a nap on the couch. They don't really have to use their legs the rest of the day per se. Whereas a wheelchair basketball player goes through conditioning and they're crushing their upper body. And if it's a day chair user, a non-ambulatory athlete, now the rest of the day they have to push their chair to class. They have to sit in their chair all day. They have to then push into their apartment. They have to push back to practice. So there's no break. And so the resiliency, I think, of an adapted athlete compared to an able-bodied athlete, it can't even be, you can't even compare it because I don't think it's in the same conversation. It's like the different stratosphere and the perspective that adaptive athletes have on their sport, on their life, on what's in front of them is just so different than an NIL funded able bodied athlete that has everything's cush. Everything is nice and easy and no worries. But the complaints or the woe is me on this side of the able body come out pretty quickly in comparison to an adapted athlete. And I just resonate more with adapted athletes because of the grit, because of the growth mindset, and what it takes to reach their optimal levels.
Absolutely. Handball would be the fifth wheelchair accessible sport in the Paralympics. What would that mean to see that representation on the world stage?
I mean, it's everything, and for it to be in LA 28 host nation representing the United States is a pretty big deal. And a lot of my family is originally from California. I'm the only Florida boy in the immediate family, so to go coast to coast, I think would be really neat. But it's also what's beyond that. Are we able to not just field a team and participate in Cairo, Egypt in a few weeks? Can we make a huge impact to not just bring ourselves to the next level, but the entire sport and really make that push for LA 28 and then beyond to Brisbane 2032 and beyond from there? I don't want to see it be a one and done type of situation and no shots fired, but breaking in the Olympics. I mean, breakdancing, like, let's get serious. I think it's interesting how those things happen. And when you start looking at other sports, especially on the para side, I think there's just higher bars and higher ceilings that we can get to. And it's an honor to be in charge. And it's amazing to see the staff that has assembled, and everyone's working volunteer, myself included. The misnomer is, oh, it must be nice to be paid, six figures to be the head coach of a Team USA national team. That's not the case. None of us are being paid at all. We're self-funded. We're looking for financial support from many modalities, whether it's partnership agreements or we have the city of Opelika helping us, Auburn Opelika Tourism helping us. So it's a all systems in, all systems go approach to make sure that our 16 persons, 10 athletes, 6 staff get to and from Cairo, Egypt safely and return with a medal around our neck.
I was listening to an interview that you had done with, I assume, an Opelika news station. And you were talking specifically about how when you had the initial tryout, there were 30 athletes from 14 states, primarily from wheelchair basketball, football, and tennis.
Correct.
How did you get the word out to such a specific subset of athletes?
Head coach Rob Taylor. I sat in his office for 3 hours and he guided me into a wormhole for lack of better terms, on where to source contacts from. So we leveraged the National Wheelchair Basketball Association, NWBA, to scrape recently retired Paralympians from Tokyo or Rio in the sport of wheelchair basketball, because we both felt like wheelchair basketball translates pretty seamlessly to wheelchair handball. It's a court sport. There's high speed transition plays happening. There's a lot of movement, a lot of activity. You need to be athletic. You need to be able to throw. You need to have good chair skills. And the more that I thought about it in the process of submitting the proposal, I thought, dang, we've got some secret weapons in our country. And Julie, I'd be remiss if I didn't share it's a co ed sport at this level. So we have 10 athletes total, and there's a 70-30 split men to women. So we have 3 women on our roster right now that I think are secret weapons. And I don't think the rest of the world is ready for that, because their delegations, they use their women more as decoys. And that's not the way we're going to operate. And so sending over 200 email out to team leaders and head coaches and athletic directors, just getting the word out as much as possible. That happened June 1st. And by July 5th, we had 33 athletes interested. And I believe at that first tryout, 18 were on site. There were some with travel restrictions and what have you. We selected 14 athletes on that initial tryout into our player pool. We had 8 virtual submissions from pretty high level athletes. So by our second training camp, which just happened August 2nd through 4th, we had 21 on site. We cut that down to 14, and our final roster is 10, 70, 30 split men to women with 4 alternates on the side. So we're a small delegation, we're a small family, but we intend to make a pretty large impact.
Absolutely. What is the demographic? I mean, I read through the wheelchair handball handbook of rules, and I saw that players as young as 15 can compete in senior competitions. What is the demographic on your team?
Our youngest player is 17 years old. He's a high school athlete out of the greater Atlanta area in Georgia. Our oldest player, and I use oldest with loose terms because, our players aren't old, 44 years old, I believe, out of the Birmingham area. And so we're pretty diverse in both age as well as the location, the origins of where people are coming from. It's interesting that the majority of the team is kind of in this eastern seaboard line from the Carolinas into Georgia into Alabama, Tennessee type of area. There's a couple sporadic names on the final roster out there in the Wisconsin area. And it's interesting to watch it evolve. And with our staff and our final 10, we represent over 10 states. I think it's close to 14 or 16 states. And the vision for me personally as the coach is to see all 50 states represented, including Alaska and Hawaii, and to push it as far as we can domestically. So, therefore, when we get to the international stage, we have a huge crop to pull from. It's a unique experience for us right now, of course. But the question is, what about the next tournament? So we want to make a massive splash to really catapult ourselves to make sure our trajectory and our sustainability is top notch.
Absolutely. When you're looking at the backgrounds of your athletes, disability wise, are they like I was talking to an athlete yesterday about disability and I don't exactly know how to phrase this, but like how the athletes got to their eligibility classifications.
Mm-hmm.
And he was saying that a lot of them are, from a wheelchair perspective, spinal cord injuries. Some of them are spina bifida, some of them are like other spinal cord related disabilities. Do you
Mm-hmm.
see that reflected in your lineup?
We do. And just to be clear for your listeners and viewers, it's a continuum in adaptive athletics. You have from congenital, meaning you are born with a disability, all the way to acquired. It could be car accident or anything really that led to it, even a cancer that then led to amputation of a lower extremity. So we have the whole continuum. And from a selection standpoint, we don't really focus too much on disability per se. We are looking at obviously player performance, top end, agility, speed, strength, etc., all the metrics. And then lastly, you have to factor in adaptive sports classification. And what that means is unlike able bodied sports where you pick your top however many you need on your roster and you throw the best of the best out there on the playing field or court of interest. So for basketball, you have 5 players, you put your biggest, fastest, strongest, most athletic out there. Wheelchair basketball is different, and so is wheelchair handball. In wheelchair basketball, you can only have a total of 14 points. So that point system goes from 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5 in half point increments all the way to 4.5. One is your least able or most disabled, however you look at that, all the way up to 4.5, most able or least disabled. In handball, it's a little different. We only have 4 players on the floor at all times, and we cannot exceed 12 points total. So we can meet 12 points, but we can't exceed 12 points. And our classification is 1 through 4, no half point increments. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and same structure from able to disabled all the way up. So that's kind of the general overview of how that plays a role. And irrespective of sex, it doesn't matter. You have to have a female on the floor at all times, irrespective of classification.
And can you break down what classification points mean what, like which point denotes what classification?
Yeah, so it's kind of a moving target, to be honest, classification and classifiers in general. I was actually just talking to my athletic trainer and strength coach and physiotherapist today about it because that can really change things for you. If you think you have an athlete at one class and that's changed at the last minute, your whole lineups get thrown off. So, in general, a class 4 player could be somebody that has a lot of strength in the upper extremity. And what I mean by strength is they can move in 360 degrees in what's called their cylinder. So, their cylinder is what's within side of the wheelchair itself with the cambered wheels. That's your 360-degree space. So, somebody that is a single leg amputee. That would be classified as a class 4. You know, can lean, can stoop, can grab, can reach, can do all the things that an able bodied athlete would be able to do. The only situation there is that there's an amputation. Could be above knee, could be below knee, but full strength. And then that starts to break down all the way into class 1. An example of a class 1 player could be an upper spinal cord injury, say like a T spine injury. And what that does then, when a player goes to reach outside the cylinder, they may tilt to a position where they're unable to manually get themselves up. They have to push themselves off of the chair, or if they reach, or speed is a different change. And so the cylinder is really their playing space, and that is one metric. There's a 3 part series of classification. One is a medical documentation form that your physician fills out. Two is then you go through preliminary testing with a classifier to see how far can you reach, left, right, up, down, side, etc. And then the final layer of that is in preliminary matches, you're observed by classifiers of, let me just go ahead and shoot a shot at classifiers, all and most or if not all of which are able-bodied people, and that is like a whole nother discussion, a can of worms that I don't want to open up right now. But it's interesting to think about. You have able-bodied classifiers making decisions on adaptive athletes that these classifiers have never been in a wheelchair before. So classification, it's no joke, and adaptive athletes live and die by it. And of course it makes decisions when it comes to how you select a roster, how you select a lineup, what happens if you have to bring in an alternate for an injured player or any other circumstances that prohibits them from competing on the world stage. So it's another layer of complexity that gets added in comparison to able bodied sports.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking yesterday to a wheelchair rugby player, and he was working me through how their classification works as well. And they have to have a max of 8 points, and their point delegation goes differently from wheelchair handball. And I just think that the classification system is so interesting because, like you were saying, there are sports that just simply put their best athletes out, and that's how they compete.
Right.
It almost seems like with adaptive athletes, there is significantly more strategy
Hmm.
that goes into fielding your team. Do you agree?
I agree. I think it's the complexity that's involved, and that's on the court. You also have to factor in off the court. For example, before the recording, I just told you I was on the phone with Delta for 45 minutes. You're taking a delegation of 16, 10 are athletes. Majority are non-ambulatory wheelchair users, and so you have a day chair plus a game chair, and getting that equipment through an airport, through security, through baggage claim, making sure equipment isn't damaged and arriving on time. I mean, it's a lot, to say the absolute least. But at the end of the day, it's an opportunity to provide athletes and humans in general with the chance to represent USA on the world stage. I mean, yeah, you're going to go through some stressful moments, but when the national anthem is playing and you have a delegation alongside of you, there's no replacement for that experience.
Absolutely. When you're looking at handball and wheelchair handball specifically on the world stage, do you find that the interest stateside was immediate, or do you think that it took some time and outreach to improve?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think initially I had a thought in mind of building a team. And when I reached out to my immediate network, everyone was all in. And then you start talking with athletes, and athletes can be finicky. And speaking from experience, you're comfortable with one sport. You don't want to go try something random that you've never done before in your life. But that's a continuum too. You also have other athletes that are crazy hungry for an opportunity to compete and to thrive. And so it was a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but I never lost sight of the vision. And that also includes our mission, and the mission is to elevate, to make sure that there's an opportunity for sure, but how do we maximize this opportunity to reach global status? And what I mean by that is, again, we don't just want to participate. I don't like participation medals. I throw those in the garbage. We're here to be successful, and it takes a lot of work, sure, but when you're on board and you understand where we're coming from, then you return and you're proud of the work that you've done from the start all the way through to the finish.
Up to this point, is there anything that you think that I'm missing about your story or the trajectory of wheelchair handball in the US? What it looks like to compete? Anything that you would like to add to the questions that we've already asked?
I mean, you've asked some pretty amazing questions, so shout out to you as a host. And not surprised, I was impressed with our pre call. So thank you for extracting some really good, thought provoking questions.
Yeah, thank you.
What's
Um,
interesting, Julia, is that this sport started in the 90s in Japan. And to date, there's about 40 countries playing an iteration of it, whether it's six-a-side or four-a-side, to go back to your earlier question on how it derived. We're interested in playing four-a-side, but there could be an opportunity, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, to also have a six-a-side iteration of it in the future. So we want to make sure we connect with as many delegations as possible in a variety of nations to be able to travel abroad, to gain experience, not only for our athletes, but for the sport as a whole. And I think it'll be really cool when we get to 2028 to see where everyone is. And my intention is continue to push the needle and demand a lot from our athletes, but I also demand a lot from myself and my staff. And I always say we hold each other accountable. We're not going to be outworked from an athlete standpoint, nor we won't be outworked from a staff standpoint. I can promise you that. So we'll see where it goes, and it's an honor to be a part of it all. It's exciting. It's inaugural. It only happens once, and to reiterate on the mindfulness initiative, I'm trying to be as present as possible because I know these things don't happen all the time. So soaking it in minute by minute and breath by breath is a really important piece to the puzzle for me.
when I was kind of researching the International Handball Federation World Championship that y'all are going to in Cairo, you had been quoted as saying that you were going to go and you were going to go for gold and you were going to bring a gold back for the US.
Absolutely.
What about the process of competing in that space makes you so confident?
Athletes, period. That's it. I know there are secret weapons, and I've watched a lot of film on other delegations, and we have a huge opportunity in front of us to really shock the world. In fact, our opening match is against the reigning champions, Team Brazil, on center court. And I am so excited. I mean, my hair's kind of sticking up right now. I'm pumped for that because you get a chance to show up and you get a chance for everyone to just jaw drop because they're not ready. They have no idea who we are. They have no idea what we're capable of doing. And it's kind of this notion of, oh yeah, US is coming. They'll be big, fast and strong, but they have no idea what's about to hit them. And that's why I have so much confidence in my athletes. I know what their capabilities are, and I've seen them perform in their respective sports at a really high level. Now it's just a matter of fine tuning some of the dials on the equalizer and showing up and turning basketball and wheelchair tennis and rugby and softball and football into handball. I mean, it's ripe for us as American athletes. We've been doing this our whole life. It just looks a little different. It's the same music, it's just a different genre.
When you look at fielding a team for a different sport full of high-level players from a different sport,
Hmm.
do you find that that coalescence is easy because they're already elite athletes, or is it different because they're learning a completely different sport?
I'll say yes to that question. I mean, it's like, well, what's the definition of easy, right? Nothing's easy. But I know, I'm being facetious. It's it's seamless and it's also really, really difficult. Like it kind of swings on this pendulum from there's days of holy crap, like we're gonna be dominating this situation, and then there's other days where like oh boy, we got some work to do. So it's a matter of keeping that pendulum as equalized as possible so we limit as much variability in that swing because you don't want to ride peaks and you don't want to sink into valleys. And that's part of our job as a staff to make sure that our athletes are tracking in the right direction and they're elevating their performance and their learning curve is shortened in order for us to maximize the experience. So it's not easy, but it's also not difficult. Our athletes make it easy for us, and our support network makes it easy for us. But it doesn't mean that, we're just walking around with our hands tied behind our back and just waiting for things to happen. My staff is amazing and they've worked their ass off. Sorry for the French. And it's been incredible to see what we've accomplished in such a short period of time. You're usually given a quad, which is 4 years. We were given a quad with air quotes, and it was 4 months. So it's kind of audacious. I'm not gonna lie, and it's pretty insane to be fully, transparent. But it feels right. It's not so much above the neck, it's more below the shoulders. And when you follow that intuition, I think success meets you where you are. And that's what we're so excited for.
What are the implications for increased exposure now that you guys got the wild card slot in your first world championship?
Yeah, it's everything. It's the irony behind it, and really it's the kind of full circle. There's a lot of these full circles, but here's another one. The president of the International Handball Federation is Dr. Mustafa. He's Egyptian and he's been at Auburn University before. I've shaken his hand as an athlete. So that was 10 years ago. And now in 2024, hopefully I get to shake his hand again as the head coach of a brand new team. And I think when he saw our proposal, it made sense. Anytime Team USA gets involved in something, it's positive. And when it's positive, it helps every other delegation. And so we know we have a lot of weight on our shoulders, but we also know that we don't have anything to lose. It's our very first, and maybe it's an amazing experience. But at the end of the day, you try to learn as much as you can. And it's either you break in the adversity or you build in the adversity. And that's the fixed versus growth mindset. And I know you know that as a sports psychologist. And so the lens that we look through, you seek the positive. You have those positive thoughts that then conjure those positive results. If you get stuck in the negative or you worry too much about things you can't control, when the moment is happening, it escapes you because you're lost in thought. And that's not the way I roll. And that's not the way my staff rolls. And I don't think that's the way my athletes roll. And so, as a small delegation of 16, we have a vibe around us and it's powerful. And I'm super pumped to see our athletes back on site August 30th through September 1st for our final send off camp to really refine everything we need to refine and show up in Egypt and shock the world.
When you're looking at such a small sample size of athletes, how do you go about growing the outreach?
It takes a village.
Are they all from different sports like we were talking about earlier, or did they come up through wheelchair handball?
None of them came up through wheelchair handball except for one, and he's the youngest. Najee Smoothers, out of the greater Atlanta area that I referenced earlier, just turned 17 about a month and a half ago. He played an iteration of handball as a youth athlete. He also plays wheelchair football, wheelchair tennis, wheelchair basketball. He's in wheelchair track and field. So he's been exposed to a lot of sports. He's a multi sport athlete. But the rest of our athletes, they didn't even know wheelchair handball existed, let alone you can compete on the international stage. So it was kind of a shock factor to a lot of athletes, but to see how quickly they've adopted the opportunity to represent Team USA, that those things don't happen frequently. They know it's rare and they know it's special, and a lot of them understand what's at stake. And what's so cool is athletes are meeting us where we are as we meet athletes where they are, and to keep in mind that it's their team. We don't play the sport. We're there to guide and we're there to soak in the experience. I think when we return in September, people are going to be really surprised by what we've done in a short period of time and what that means for us in the future.
I'm about to ask you an incredibly vague question, and I
Uh
just want
oh.
you to answer as you see fit.
Thank you for the preface. I appreciate it.
What kind of coach are you?
What kind of coach am I? I'm human. And what I mean by that is I make mistakes, but I own those mistakes. And once I own that mistake, I search for support from my staff and from my athletes because it's got to be all in. This opportunity to be appointed an inaugural team, I wasn't given the rule book. I wasn't given the A to Z. I was given a blank sheet of paper and I was told, go paint. So it may look right now like a Picasso, but I know when we show up and we return, you're going to see what the picture is. It's very clear because my approach is being intentional, having a methodic lens on things. I believe personally is what gets you to the highest level. I don't do anything random. When it comes to speaking to anyone or communicating information or trying to make decisions, it's well thought out. And I have an amazing support network in my life, family, friends, and loved ones. And again, the staff that's been assembled, I mean, it makes my job easy, and they're working their asses off, and the athletes are doing the same. And so I'm a mirror. I try to set myself up and mirror and lead by example. And so when we get to that medal match, no one's surprised. Everyone is nodding their head and saying, makes sense. Here we are. Let's go do what we intended to do.
Love that. How can we watch you guys in Egypt?
We will be on the International Handball Federation live stream. So if your listeners or your viewers want to check us out, go into IHF. We are the third wheelchair world championship. It'll all be posted on social media. They can follow us on USATH Instagram, like the whole 9 yards. I'm not the best at the social media game. I've got way too much other stuff to worry about, but it'll be posted. They're doing a nice job of keeping up with our story. We've had close to 10 press releases and interviews, news releases, podcasts. Even yourself inviting us on is really important to us. So if anyone's interested, please feel free to reach out. We are definitely easy to contact. It's not like we're hidden in a black hole. You can find us anywhere on the internet.
Is there anything that you think that I missed about this interview about wheelchair handball, about your background. I'm done with my questions, so the floor is yours to fill in any gaps that you think that I missed, anything that we may not have paid enough attention to,
You did
whatever.
an amazing job with preparation, Julia, and I'm not surprised. And the through line that you crafted and the different threads you pulled on it's perfect. So I appreciate you having me, and thank you to your listeners and your viewership for supporting our team. And please be on the lookout, for us to make a massive impact and really shock the world stage. We're looking forward to it.
Absolutely. I'm not exactly sure when your episode will come out, but keeping in mind that we do have a date for Cairo, the plan is to get it out prior to that. So somewhere in the
Amazing.
next month, this episode will be posted. If anything changes between now and then, just keep me updated. Text me. You have my number, email, whatever, and then I'll share this with you when it comes out. I hope you love it. Thank you so much
Perfect.
for hanging out, for answering these questions, for introducing the world to wheelchair handball. I'm so
Yeah,
excited to
definitely.
put together this episode. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate you. Thank you for being an amazing host. I really enjoyed the interview.
Yeah, I'll get back in touch with you once it's posted and we'll go from there. Good luck
Perfect.
in Egypt.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Julia. Enjoy the rest of your day. We'll talk soon.